In the endless gulf between galaxies, where even the warp's light fades into nothing, something stirs. It is hunger, pure and ancient. A hunger not born of chaos, not crafted by the dark gods, but something far older, colder, and more deliberate. When the veil between realities quivers, this presence slips through. A shadow in a cloak of emptiness, carrying the ruin of entire worlds in its wake. His name, whispered across the ages of another universe, is Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger. Before his arrival, the Milky Way of the 41st Millennium was already a graveyard of civilizations. The Imperium of man, stretched thin across 1,000,000 worlds, was locked in endless wars against aliens, heretics, and demons. The warp raged like a wounded beast, and in that storm of psychic chaos, a new anomaly began to form, an echo that didn't belong. Imperial navigators first detected it near the edge of Segmentum Obscurus, beyond even the halo stars. The Astronomicon flickered as something began to consume psychic energy, not in attack, but in feeding. At first, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica dismissed it as another warp distortion, but within days, hundreds of astropaths across several sectors screamed and died simultaneously. Their souls were not claimed by demons. They were devoured, drained completely, leaving behind only husks and echoes. And that was when the Inquisition took notice. Inquisitor Lord Veritas of the Ordo Malleus was among the first to respond. He had seen demonic incursions before, seen the madness of the Eye of Terror firsthand. But this was different. The pattern of deaths, the way the warp currents bent inward toward a single focal point. It was as though something alive was feeding on the Immaterium itself. The Inquisition feared another chaos god was being born. They were wrong. At the edge of known space, a derelict star system, long abandoned, its suns collapsing into dying embers, became the center of the anomaly. A fleet of imperial vessels arrived, led by the battle barge Imperius Sanctum. Their mission? To investigate, contain, and if possible, exterminate the source. But as they translated from the warp, they found not a demon world, not a cult or heresy, but a single vessel, a ship of alien design, black as the void, its hull cracked and ancient, as though it had crossed not just distance, but time itself. It was the Ravager, the dread vessel of Darth Nihilus. The first to board it were Death Watch veterans, warriors trained to confront the Xenos and the unholy alike. Their Auspex scanners detected no life signs. The corridors were silent, filled with shadows that swallowed light. They reported faint whispers, like prayers being recited backward. And then, the Vox went dead. Moments later, the Imperius Sanctum itself began to lose power. Every servitor, every psyker, every soul aboard felt it, the slow, creeping drain of their life essence. Nihilus was awake. When he emerged from the void of his ship, there was no warning, no light, no sound, just the feeling of being emptied, as if reality itself recoiled from his presence. Clad in black robes, his mask gleaming white against the darkness, Darth Nihilus did not speak. He did not need to. His hunger spoke for him. The entire fleet, hundreds of thousands of souls, were consumed in minutes. Their bodies fell where they stood, withered to dust. The Ravager absorbed the energy like a starving god. For the Imperium, this marked the beginning of what would later be called the Silence of Carthon Reach. The warp around the region collapsed into stillness. Not calm, but absence. Even demons avoided it. No psychic communication could pass through. Planets went dark one by one. It was as if someone were eating the galaxy itself, piece by piece. The Ordo Malleus deployed the Grey Knights soon after. At first, they believed it was a demonic incursion. They were half right. Darth Nihilus was not of chaos, but he embodied everything chaos fed upon: pain, death, and desire. Yet unlike the ruinous powers, he sought no worship. He sought only to feed. When the first Grey Knight strike force arrived on the dead world of Carthon 9, they found an entire planet reduced to ash. No life, no souls, just dust, blowing across ruins that still hummed with psychic residue. At the center of that desolation stood Nihilus, drawing upon the very echo of the Force within this new universe. But the Force here was different. It was twisted, fractured by the warp. He found its flavor intoxicating, raw, violent, and endless. For the first time since his transformation, he felt not sated, but empowered. The warp and the Force intertwined within him, giving his hunger new depths. The galaxy had never known a being like him. The Grey Knights, immune to corruption, yet not immune to death, confronted him in open battle. They invoked the name of the Emperor and unleashed sanctified fire, psychic might, and bolter shells infused with the blood of saints. But Nihilus was no demon to be banished. He did not bleed. He did not die. He simply consumed. Their psychic wards were stripped away as he drew in their very essence, feeding not on flesh, but on the soul energy that powered their faith and fury. Within hours, the elite warriors of Titan were gone, their armor empty husks glinting beneath a pale, dead sun. Back on Terra, the High Lords gathered in emergency session. Even the Emperor's custodians felt a faint disturbance through the Golden Throne. Reports came in from other sectors. Worlds going dark, whole populations vanishing overnight. The Ecclesiarchy declared it a new heresy. The Mechanicus called it a data corruption in reality. Only the Inquisition understood the truth. Something had crossed the veil, something outside the Emperor's light. And deep in the Imperium, even the Chaos Gods turned their gaze toward this intruder. To them, Nihilus was an abomination, a void where worship and emotion went to die. He could not be tempted, for he already embodied entropy. He consumed even the psychic fabric that gave them form. Khorne raged. Tzeentch watched in curiosity. Slaanesh tasted fear for the first time in eons. Only Nurgle laughed. For decay, he said, always finds new shapes. Yet Nihilus was not unstoppable. For in consuming the warp, he risked awakening its deeper currents, entities far beyond mortal comprehension, sleeping gods who would not tolerate theft from their domain. His hunger would lead him into confrontation with forces even he could not devour. The warp itself, and the Emperor of mankind, whose psychic presence burned brighter than any soul Nihilus had ever encountered. But for now, he drifted, a phantom consuming light, faith, and life, and every world he touched became a grave. Across the Imperium, whispers spread of a white-masked reaper, a being who devoured souls instead of blood, who turned saints into shadows. And in the silence that followed his passing, even chaos trembled. The galaxy had faced extinction many times before, but never had it faced hunger itself. And as the warp screamed in distant pain, the Emperor stirred slightly upon his golden throne. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Astronomicon flickered again. Across Terra, the choir of 10,000 psychers screamed in unison, a sound like the death of stars. The Emperor's light did not fail, but it dimmed, like a candle gasping for air. Tech priests scrambled to stabilize the soul relay, believing the fault to be mechanical. But deep within the throne room, the Emperor's gaze, if he could still be said to have one, turned outward, beyond the boundaries of the warp, and felt it. The pull of an impossible hunger. Somewhere in the void between stars, a presence was feeding on the warp itself. Reports from the segmentum obscurus grew more fragmented by the hour. Every astropath who attempted communication suffered catastrophic psychic feedback. Fleets sent to investigate never returned. Even the Ordo Malleus, armed with the most potent demon-hunting technology in existence, could not explain it. The enemy left no signature of chaos, no taint, no corruption, merely emptiness, perfect, sterile annihilation. Inquisitor Veritas, stationed aboard the Black Sepulchre, began compiling what little data remained. He pieced together fragments of intercepted logs, orbital telemetry, and terrified Vox transmissions. Among them, one final recording from a Grey Knight brother captain, his voice barely a whisper. He does not speak. He does not breathe. He takes the light and makes it nothing. Emperor, protect us. It's hunger made flesh. That single phrase, hunger made flesh, became the foundation for the Imperium's new codename, Event Nihilus. Within the Inquisition, debate raged. Was this the birth of a fifth chaos god, a warp phenomenon, or perhaps an ancient Xenos weapon rediscovered? The Mechanicus leaned toward the latter theory, hypothesizing that the black vessel, the so-called Ravager, was a dimensional anchor, pulling energy from parallel timelines. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica disagreed, citing the unnatural manner of the soul drain, unlike any warp-based mechanism. But none of them could imagine the truth, that a being from an entirely different reality had entered theirs, one whose connection to the Force, now interwoven with the warp, made him something beyond their comprehension. As the Imperium struggled to understand, Darth Nihilus continued to feed. Systems once vibrant with life now hung silent in the void. Entire planets vanished from psychic detection. Even chaos cultists found their demons silent, their masters devoured before they could whisper a word. To Nihilus, all life was sustenance. The Force, that binding energy of another universe, resonated faintly within every soul in the 41st millennium. And so he feasted endlessly, without limit. But the warp is not a passive victim. It remembers pain. It fights back. And as Nihilus consumed, he began to attract attention, not only from mortal powers, but from the Imperium itself. The first to reach him were the Thousand Sons, sorcerers of Tzeentch, whose Lord Magnus the Red had felt the disturbance rippling through the warp. Curious and enraged in equal measure, Magnus dispatched a cohort of his most potent sorcerers through the Eye of Terror. They sought to commune, to learn, to bind this new entity in service to their master. Their fleet reached the dead world of Vathros, one of Nihilus's recent feeding grounds. There, amidst the skeletal remains of an imperial hive, they found him. The confrontation that followed would later be etched into the collective fear of every psyker in the galaxy. The Thousand Sons formed a psychic circle, chanting in the ancient tongues of Prospero. Warp flames blazed as their collective will tore open a gate to the Imperium. From the burning rift, Magnus himself appeared, or at least his shadow, a manifestation of godlike arrogance and power. He addressed Nihilus directly, his voice echoing through the ash-choked air. "You drain the sea in which we swim, little ghost. Do you know what you starve?" But Nihilus did not answer. His reply was a sound, a hollow, resonant wail that carried no words, only hunger. The Force rippled outward, colliding with warp energy in a storm of psychic distortion. Demons screamed and dissolved as the two powers clashed. Magnus, for all his might, felt something he hadn't in 10 millennia: weakness. Nihilus was feeding not only on his essence, but on the raw warp itself that made Magnus immortal. The Primarch withdrew before the confrontation could destroy him entirely, but his message to the other Chaos gods was clear. This was no rival demon prince. This was something alien, something that could consume even gods. And so the great game shifted. For the first time in eons, the Chaos gods found common cause to stop the hunger before it devoured them all. Yet even united, their power could not breach the barrier between realities that Nihilus now commanded. His will fused with the warp currents he had consumed, twisting them into conduits of his own dark resonance. Meanwhile, in the material universe, the Imperium grew desperate. The silence spreading from the Obscurus sector had reached the Segmentum Solar's outer fringes. Astropathic communication faltered. Warp routes collapsed. Starships vanished mid-translation. The ecclesiarchy began to preach that the end times had come. The hollowing, a punishment for humanity's lack of faith. Pilgrims flooded to Terra, begging forgiveness at the feet of the ecclesiarch. But faith could not stop the void. It was then that an unlikely figure offered a potential weapon. Belisarius Cawl, the Archmagos Dominus, had spent centuries studying psychic resonance and warp harmonics. When reports of Nihilus's consumption reached Mars, he recognized a pattern, the signature of dimensional convergence. Cawl hypothesized that this entity was not native to the warp, but drew power from an overlapping dimension, similar in nature, yet distinct. If it could be isolated, perhaps it could be severed from its feeding source. Cawl proposed constructing a resonant null field, a device designed to interrupt the frequency between the force and the warp. But to do so required energy on an unimaginable scale, and more dangerously, a lure strong enough to attract Nihilus's attention. That lure, Cawl suggested, was the Emperor himself. The proposal was heresy. To use the Emperor's psychic light as bait was unthinkable, but the alternative was extinction. And so, in secret, the Inquisition and the Mechanicus formed Operation Cathexis, a last desperate attempt to confront the Devourer. While the Mechanicus prepared the device, the Inquisition sought warriors capable of facing the entity should containment fail. They turned to the only force whose will might resist his hunger, the Sisters of Silence, psychic nulls, immune to warp corruption. An army of them was gathered, numbering in the thousands, a rarity not seen since the Great Crusade. Their presence alone caused lesser psychers to faint. Their collective aura of nothingness would, it was hoped, weaken Nihilus's connection to the warp. And so, the stage was set. In the depths of the void, Darth Nihilus drifted, a phantom bound to his hunger, his consciousness barely more than instinct and echo. Yet within the warp's howling winds, he sensed something unfamiliar. Light, a beacon so potent, so radiant, that even through his hollow senses, it called to him. It was not a soul, it was not a star, it was something more. He turned toward it, toward Terra, and as the Emperor's light flickered once more, the master of mankind, ancient, immobile, yet omniscient, whispered through the void for the first time in 10,000 years. "Come then, Devourer, let us see whose hunger is greater." The galaxy trembled, in the cold gulf between Terra and the edge of the Segmentum Solar. Imperial forces gathered in silence. Vast fleets hung like glittering scars across the void. Battleships, cruisers, and Mechanicus constructs all pointed toward a single objective: the containment of something that could unmake existence itself. Operation Cathexis had begun. Belisarius Cawl stood aboard the Archdominatus, surrounded by arcane devices that blurred the line between faith and forbidden science. His voice crackled across encrypted vox channels, addressing the assembled lords and admirals of the Imperium. This being feeds upon the immaterium as a predator upon flesh. It is neither demon nor god, but something that operates beyond our metaphysical constants. If my calculations hold, the resonant null field can sever its link to sustenance, but it must be activated at the precise instant of proximity when it reaches for the Emperor's light. A deathly silence followed. The idea of using the Emperor's own psychic beacon as bait was unthinkable. Even to speak of interfering with the Astronomicon bordered on blasphemy. Yet desperation left little room for sanctity. Inquisitor Veritas, grim-faced and unshaven from sleepless days, replied from the bridge of his flagship, Oath of Iron. "You play with heresy, Magos. If this fails, the Emperor's flame could gutter out entirely." "If it succeeds," Karl countered, "then the Devourer will starve before it reaches Terra." From the shadows of the chamber, another voice joined, soft, disciplined, yet resonant with ancient command. It belonged to Knight Centura Lysera Valanthe, commander of the Sisters of Silence. "Then we must ensure it never touches him. My sisters will form a perimeter around the throne world. Our null fields will smother its hunger." Her tone betrayed no fear, though every psyche within 1,000 light years trembled. The sisters' presence was antithetical to the warp itself. They were voids in human form. Against Nihilus, they might be humanity's only weapon that did not rely on the soul he craved. As preparations began, the Ravager moved through the void like a wound in reality. Nihilus's ship did not travel through the warp as Imperial vessels did. It drifted between. Wherever it passed, the warp folded inward, collapsing in silent implosions that left psychic silence in its wake. Entire chaos warbands fled from its path, their demons flickering out like candles as their essence was consumed. Even the servants of Nurgle, immune to despair, felt unease. There was no rot left when Nihilus fed. There was simply nothing. Inside the vessel's black heart, the Sith Lord stirred. His presence was little more than a voice, hollow, echoing across the dead halls of his ship. His consciousness no longer tethered to flesh. He existed as hunger incarnate, bound to the faint remnants of his mask and armor. He had crossed galaxies not by design, but by instinct, drawn by the warp's resonance, a new flavor of the Force that promised endless sustenance. Now that sustenance beckoned stronger than ever, a light so powerful it pierced the veil between realities, a light he needed. He turned his will toward it. The Ravager shifted course. Back in the Sol system, the void began to distort. The Adeptus Mechanicus detected the anomaly first, a gravitational inversion that made planets tremble. The outer defenses of the system flared to life, as if in panic. Mars ignited its forges, sending mechanical fleets to orbit. The Imperial Navy aligned in defensive phalanxes, their ships forming a wall of adamantium and faith. And upon Terra, the Golden Throne blazed like a sun. The Emperor's psychic light grew in intensity, not dimming, but expanding, as if answering the call of the oncoming void. The Ecclesiarchy called it a miracle. The Inquisition called it a warning. For the first time in millennia, the Emperor's presence felt active. Deep within the sanctum of the Imperial Palace, the Sisters of Silence took their positions. Thousands of them stood in disciplined silence, surrounding the throne's chamber. Their null auras merged, forming an invisible wall against psychic intrusion. Knight Centura Valanthe led them with unflinching purpose. Around her, Custodes stood guard, the 10,000, unbreakable, golden, silent as statues. The most sacred place in existence had become a fortress against the approaching abyss. And still, the Emperor watched. The Ravager entered the system like a ghost, sliding past detection grids and auspex arrays as if reality refused to acknowledge it. The moment it breached the system's inner perimeter, thousands of astropaths died screaming. The void roared with silence. The first Imperial ships to intercept, the St. Drusus battle group, never fired a shot. Their crews fell to the deck, drained to husks before the order to engage could even be given. Their reactors shut down, their souls devoured. The Ravager drifted past, feeding on the life force that had once powered their faith. On Mars, alarms blared as Call activated the resonant null field. The air filled with a high-pitched vibration, a note that reverberated not through sound, but through the warp itself. The Mechanicus prayed to the Omnissiah as the device roared to life, sending ripples of anti-resonance through the void. For a moment, it seemed to work. The Ravager faltered, its hull flickering in and out of phase. Nihilus's hunger twisted upon itself, unable to feed. But then, the Sith Lord extended his will. The Force, dark, endless, ravenous, merged with the warp energy he had already consumed, overpowering the null frequencies. The Mechanicus machines burned out instantly, their circuits liquefied by the paradox of existence and nothingness colliding. Cal stared at the readouts in disbelief. He's adapting. He's learning the harmonics. Emperor, save us. He's feeding on the field itself. The Ravager surged forward. Terra's orbital defenses opened fire. Macro cannon shells the size of houses streaked across space, followed by plasma bursts and lance strikes. They struck the dark ship and vanished. No explosion, no impact. The energy simply ceased to exist. The Mechanicus ships fell next. The void began to quake. Inquisitor Veritas, aboard the Oath of Iron, made the final transmission before communication was lost. He's coming straight for the throne. No warp jump, no translation. He's tearing through space itself. By the throne. The air itself screams. And then nothing. The Ravager entered Terra's upper atmosphere. Its descent was silent, leaving trails of black fire in its wake. The skies of the throne world dimmed, the sun itself appearing to recoil behind clouds of ash. Across the planet, billions fell to their knees as the psychic drain began. Every living soul felt their warmth fade, their strength ebb. The Emperor's light flickered. In the Imperial Palace, alarms blared as reality twisted. Custodes formed a shield line. The Sisters of Silence closed their ranks, their null auras clashing against the growing shadow. And then he appeared. A shape coalesced within the great hall of the throne. A tall, cloaked figure of smoke and despair, a white mask gleaming faintly amid the dark. The sound that accompanied him was not a voice, but a pull. 1,000 souls crying out as they were devoured mid-breath. Darth Nihilus had arrived on Terra. For the first time since the Horus Heresy, the Emperor of Mankind faced a foe, not born of the warp, not of chaos, but of hunger incarnate. The air trembled as his presence met that of the Devourer. Light and void collided. The warp howled in agony, and in that moment, the galaxy held its breath, for the Emperor stirred, not as a corpse upon a throne, but as a god awakened. The chamber of the Golden Throne was no longer a place of quiet sanctity. It had become the eye of an apocalyptic storm. The marble walls of the Sanctum Imperialis cracked under the strain of impossible energies. Cherub servitors fell from the air, their mechanical wings smoldering as psychic fire consumed them. The Emperor's light blazed brighter than ever, a sun of divine fury and willpower, while before him, Darth Nihilus stood, silent, patient, and endlessly hungry. To the human eye, it was a moment frozen in time. The two most powerful beings ever to exist in either galaxy facing one another across a gulf of eternity. But to psychers, to those sensitive to the unseen, it was chaos beyond description. The warp convulsed, folding inward as Nihilus drew in its substance. The force twisted around him like a living storm, and through that storm, the Emperor's consciousness pushed outward, vast and golden, defying annihilation itself. The Custodes were the first to move. Gleaming in gold, they charged with halberds raised high, the Emperor's name echoing through their vox amplifiers. Each one was a demigod, the living embodiment of his will. Yet as they closed the distance, their armor blackened, their motions slowed, and their lives simply ended. They did not die in agony. They were emptied. Their souls were drawn out in a single breath, devoured before their weapons could even touch the figure that floated silently above the marble floor. Nihilus turned his head slightly, the white mask gleaming like a pale moon. No joy, no rage, only hunger. The Sisters of Silence advanced next. Thousands of them, arrayed in perfect discipline, their presence tearing holes in the warp around them. As they marched, reality began to steady. The air stilled. The psychic noise dimmed. Even Nihilus faltered, sensing the sudden vacuum in his feast. The sisters' null auras made them invisible to his senses. He could not feed on what did not resonate in the Force or the warp. Knight Centra, Lysera Valanthe, raised her blade and led the charge. She had faced demons, heretics, and Xenos horrors beyond comprehension, but never something like this. Even so, her steps did not waver. As her squad reached the dais before the throne, Nihilus raised a hand, and the ground shattered beneath them. Yet still, they pressed forward, their null fields clashing with his aura of hunger. For the first time, the Devourer recoiled. He reached out with the Force, seeking to crush their minds, and found nothing. Their silence was absolute. The force that bound all life slipped through their existence like water through stone. It was as if they were wounds in the universe itself. The clash of emptiness against emptiness tore at reality's fabric. Nihilus howled, not in pain, but in confusion. This was a hunger that could not be fed, a void that matched his own. The sound, that spectral wail, reverberated across terror, through the warp and into the souls of billions. Millions fell dead instantly, their spirits extinguished by proximity alone. From the golden throne, a voice rose, ancient, commanding, and filled with both infinite sorrow and divine wrath. Enough. The word was not heard. It was known. It resonated through the air, through stone, through thought. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor of Mankind spoke. His golden light erupted outward, filling the throne chamber. Time itself slowed. The sisters froze mid-stride, suspended like statues in holy illumination. Nihilus turned toward the light, and the hunger in him surged. The energy that poured from the throne was beyond anything he had ever felt. It was the force made flesh, magnified through the warp's vastness, infinite and irresistible. He reached toward it instinctively, a starving god drawn to sustenance divine. The Emperor allowed it. Nihilus's hand extended, the void surrounding him deepening as he began to feed. Streams of light tore from the air, pouring into his body. His mask cracked, his shadow expanded. For a fleeting moment, it seemed he might succeed, that he would drain even the Emperor's light, as he had all others. But then, the illusion shattered. The Emperor had not offered himself to be devoured. He had invited Nihilus inside. In an instant, their consciousnesses collided, not in the material world, but within the warp itself. The Force and the warp merged in a storm of impossible scale. Stars flickered, demons screamed and imploded. Across the galaxy, psychers fell into seizures as they experienced echoes of the encounter. Within that blinding psychic conflagration, two entities faced one another. The Emperor appeared as a figure of blinding gold, his form both man and god. Nihilus was a swirling vortex of darkness, shaped vaguely like a man, his mask the only constant. Around them stretched a landscape of pure thought. Fragments of galaxies, broken timelines, souls screaming across eternity. "You are hunger," the Emperor said, his voice calm amid the chaos. "But you are not purpose." Nihilus's response was not words, but a wave of consumption. He surged forward, devouring light, devouring space, devouring the very fabric of the psychic plane. The Emperor did not resist. Instead, he allowed the darkness to close around him. And then, like a sun collapsing into a supernova, he expanded. Golden fire erupted from within the void. Nihilus screamed, the sound tearing holes in unreality. The force within him twisted, trying to consume the Emperor's essence, but every fragment of light he devoured became more light, infinite, self-sustaining, divine. For the first time, Darth Nihilus felt something alien to him. He felt fear. The Emperor's voice echoed again, now like thunder through eternity. "You were made to feed, and in feeding, you are bound. You are a void, pretending to be a god. You have no will, only appetite. I am will incarnate." The two forces collided again, their struggle radiating through the warp, like the birth of a new sun. The chaos, gods themselves recoiled. Khorne raged against the unseen assault. Tzeentch screamed in fury as his plans dissolved. Slaanesh fell silent. Nurgle wept with laughter. The Imperium trembled, not from faith or sin, but from balance. In the physical world, the Golden Throne's energy readings spiked beyond comprehension. The Sisters of Silence shielded themselves as golden lightning ripped through the chamber. Servitors melted. The custodes prayed in silence, unable to move, knowing they stood in the presence of divinity and damnation intertwined. Then, suddenly, it was over. The light dimmed. The air grew still. The warp fell quiet, eerily quiet. Where Nihilus had stood, there was only his shattered mask, lying at the base of the throne's steps. Knight Centura Valanthe approached cautiously, blade drawn. The mask pulsed faintly, as though still alive, then crumbled to dust. A soft whisper, ancient, wordless, echoed in her mind before fading forever. From the throne, a single breath of light escaped, golden, tired, but resolute. The Emperor's voice came once more, faint yet clear. "He is gone, but the hunger remains outside." The skies of terror began to clear. The sun's light returned. Across the Imperium, astropaths gasped as the Astronomicon flared bright again, stronger than it had been in centuries. But deep within the warp, something stirred. A residue, an after-image of Nihilus's essence, spreading like ink through water. He was gone. Yet his nature, his hunger, had touched the warp itself. And hunger, once awakened, never sleeps. In the heart of the warp, Nihilus's hunger expanded into something vast and terrible. It was not merely the hunger for life, but for existence itself. The echoes of reality, the whispers of souls, the psychic aftertaste of thought and faith. The warp responded to him as though recognizing kin, yet recoiling in fear. He was not born of it, but something adjacent, a force parallel to chaos, ancient and cold, shaped by the will of the dark side. Within that storm of psychic madness, Nihilus wandered, consuming demons that dared approach him. They screamed as their essence was torn apart, devoured not into the warp, but into an abyss, deeper than the Imperium could define. And somewhere across the galaxy, astropaths felt a silence fall upon their minds. Not quiet, nothingness. Their psychic link severed not by distance, but by absence. It was as though a portion of the warp itself had been erased. The Inquisition took note. The Ordo Malleus dispatched strike teams of Grey Knights to investigate these hollow zones, entire sectors where demons vanished, where psychic resonance dropped to zero. Ships sent into these regions rarely returned, and those that did spoke of an impossible figure, cloaked, faceless, surrounded by the dying light of stars. This was Darth Nihilus, the Lord of Hunger, the voice that devours. He had found his way to the Cadian Gate. Cadian long-range augurs first detected the disturbance as a void storm, a psychic nullfield expanding from the edge of the sector. Thousands of souls vanished across dozens of ships before anyone understood what was happening. Vox channels filled with screams, prayers, and then silence. Even the Astronomican's light dimmed across the region. On Terra, the Emperor stirred. The Golden Throne's sensors registered an anomaly, not of the warp, but against it. A parasitic force that consumed the very concept of psychic energy. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor's mind hesitated. Something alien had entered his domain. Something not bound by the rules of chaos or order. The Grey Knights arrived swiftly, led by Grand Master Voldus. Their ship, the Argent Vow, translated into real space at the edge of the storm. They expected demons, corruption, or heretical sorcery. What they found instead was emptiness, a dead void, where no Geller field flickered, where even the warp's whisper had been swallowed. "Report," Voldus commanded, his voice steady through the Vox. "Nothing, my lord," came the reply. "Sensors detect no souls, no energy. Even our ship's spirit is silent." And then the lights dimmed. At the center of the bridge, reality folded, a ripple of cold. Nihilus appeared not in a flash, but as a deletion of presence. His silhouette absorbed the glow of lumen panels, his mask hovering like a pale moon. The psychic wards screamed as his hunger brushed against them. Dozens of tech priests dropped dead instantly, their essence ripped from them before they could even fall. Voldus raised his demon hammer, chanting the Emperor's name. Psychic wards flared, silver fire blazing across the chamber. But Nihilus was no demon. The sanctified runes burned uselessly in his shadow. Voldus charged, a blur of adamantium and holy fury. His strike connected, slamming into Nihilus's chest with the force of a meteor. The figure staggered, but did not fall. Instead, his head tilted slightly, as if amused. Then came the sound, not of speech, but of a voice without language. The force flowed through Nihilus's will, an ancient power bending around reality. The words were hunger itself, a command to cease being. Voldus fell to his knees as the light drained from him. His armor groaned. His life force burned like incense in the void, rising toward the mask that consumed all. But the Grand Master resisted, his psychic training anchoring him to existence. "You will not take my soul," he rasped. Nihilus tilted his head once more, and the walls began to decay. Metal rusted, circuits crumbled to dust, and the ship's spirit, the machine god's voice, went silent. Nihilus was feeding. Realizing the danger, Voldus gave the order. "Purge the ship. Exterminatus protocol." The Grey Knights enacted their last rite, detonating the ship's reactor before Nihilus could consume it entirely. The explosion was vast enough to destroy a small moon. Yet when the light faded, a lone figure drifted among the debris, untouched, mask gleaming. He moved toward the nearest world, Cadia. The fortress world stood proud, its guns like spears against the stars. But when Nihilus entered its orbit, every psyker screamed and died. The Cadian choir, used to communicate with the Imperium, burned from within. The planet's astropaths turned to ash. Even the Sisters of Silence, immune to the warp, felt the pull of his void. In the capital citadel, Ursakar Creed stood on the command balcony as the night sky began to vanish, literally fade, pixel by pixel. Ships in low orbit collapsed in on themselves as Nihilus fed on their souls. Creed turned to his adjutant. "Fire everything, I don't care what it is. Just fire." Macro cannons roared. Defense lasers carved the void. But Nihilus simply drifted through the barrage, each impact dissolving into nothingness before it reached him. Then he raised his hand. Across Cadia, the air turned black. Millions fell silent mid-prayer as their life force was ripped upward like mist. Entire battalions collapsed in unison, hollow husks before their souls reached his mask. Within minutes, a third of the planet was lifeless. But the Grey Knights returned. This time, they came not to fight, but to seal. The Ordo Malleus, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Sisters of Silence had formed an alliance. They brought with them an ancient relic, a null obelisk, said to predate even the Emperor's reign. It was a device capable of erasing psychic entities, if only for a moment. As Nihilus descended upon the Cadian citadel, the Grey Knights activated the obelisk. A pulse of anti-psychic energy expanded outward, a black wave of silence. For the first time, Nihilus hesitated. His hunger recoiled from the void that matched his own. Voldus, barely alive, stepped forward again, wielding his hammer like a torch in the night. "In the Emperor's name, be gone." The hammer struck the ground. The obelisk's pulse intensified. Nihilus screamed, a sound that tore through the fabric of space, echoing into the warp itself. Demons fled. Psykers across the sector fainted. The mask cracked. And then he vanished. The world went still. The air felt heavy, thin, hollow. The Grey Knights knelt, praying the horror was over. But deep within the warp, a new shadow stirred, a hunger still unsated. The obelisk's energy readings flickered, detecting something impossible. Nihilus's presence, not destroyed, but multiplied. The pulse that struck him had not banished him. It had scattered him. Across the galaxy, faint echoes of his essence began to awaken, one by one. And the Emperor, sensing this, spoke for the first time in millennia. "Prepare the black ships," he whispered through his golden cage. "The hunger has returned." The age of devouring had only just begun. In the shadow depths of the warp, fragments of Darth Nihilus drifted like shards of a shattered god. Each fragment pulsed faintly, a sliver of hunger, seeking form, seeking life. The psychic detonation, unleashed by the null obelisk, had not ended him. It had merely divided him. And now, scattered across the stars, those fragments began to feed. Everywhere they touched, silence followed. On hive worlds, entire populations fell asleep and never awoke. On forge worlds, the machine spirits went mute. On demon worlds, the creatures of chaos shrieked as they were pulled into the black. Even the great powers of the warp, Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, felt the disturbance. Something unnatural was feeding on them. Khorne's bloodthirsters raged in fury as battlefields turned to dust beneath their feet. Tzeentch's schemes faltered as his servant's psychic essence dissolved before his eyes. Nurgle's rot failed to spread. His joyous decay halted by pure emptiness, and Slanesh, for the first time in eternity, felt true fear. The hunger of Nihilus was not desire, not lust for experience. It was obliteration. Among mortals, the Inquisition struggled to comprehend what they faced. The Ordo Malleus called it a warp deletion event. The Mechanicus termed it a quantum null cascade. But to those who saw it, who felt their souls thinning, their prayers fading, it was nothing short of apocalypse. Grandmaster Voldus survived, though his armor was cracked and his body nearly broken. He now bore the mark of Nihilus, a hollow echo inside his psychic presence. The Inquisition quarantined him aboard a sealed fortress monastery orbiting Titan. There, the greatest minds of the Imperium interrogated him, desperate to understand the nature of their foe. "What did you see?" asked Inquisitor Drake, his voice trembling despite the wards surrounding them. Voldus stared into nothing, his eyes pale with exhaustion. "I saw hunger given form," he whispered. "Not chaos. Not the warp. Something older. Something that does not desire to rule, only to end. End what? Everything." The words chilled the chamber. The Inquisitor turned to his aides. "We must inform the High Lords. If this thing returns—" "It already has," Voldus said. And he was right. Reports flooded in, from the Segmentum Obscurus, isolated worlds blinking out of contact, their population counts dropping to zero overnight. The black ships tasked with collecting psychers never returned. Even the navigator houses began to lose their ability to see the Astronomicon. It was as if the galaxy itself was being erased. Far from Terra, on the demon world of Sortiarius, the thousand-sun sorcerers of Magnus felt the tremors first. A great ritual was underway, an attempt to pierce deeper into the warp's secrets, but when Nihilus's shadow touched the ritual circle, the flames inverted. The chanting stopped. Magnus himself appeared, his massive form towering over his sorcerers. "Something comes," he growled. His single eye glowed with psychic brilliance. He peered into the Imperium, and there, at its horizon, he saw it. A shape without form, a voice without sound, a hunger that even he, the Crimson King, could not comprehend. He recoiled. "This is not chaos." The warp howled in protest as Nihilus began to feed upon its very fabric. Demon princes dissolved, their immortal forms stripped of essence. Warp storms collapsed, vanishing into vacuum. Even the eye of terror flickered, dimming for a heartbeat. Magnus turned to his followers. "Prepare the wards. If we do not act, even the gods will starve." And yet Nihilus was not acting with intent. He was instinct, hunger without will. His fragments had learned to anchor themselves by consuming minds, by latching on to souls across countless worlds. Every feeding brought them closer together, rebuilding the whole that once was Darth Nihilus. But one fragment, one sliver, found something different. On the dead world of Cadia, buried beneath the rubble of its shattered citadel, an echo of Nihilus lingered. This echo found a psychic imprint, a faint residue of Creed's last command, his unyielding will to fight even in the face of oblivion. Nihilus absorbed it. For the first time, he felt not just hunger, but memory. He remembered the Force, the galaxy that was once his, the war that consumed his soul. And slowly, his identity began to reform. The mask reappeared amid the ruins of Cadia, half buried in dust. The air shimmered. Then came the whisper, not a word, but a pulse. "I am hunger." The skies split open. Imperial patrol fleets near the Cadian Gate detected a psychic surge unlike any recorded event. The energy readings matched none of the known chaos signatures. The Adeptus Mechanicus screamed heresy. The Inquisition declared exterminatus. But it was too late. From the remains of Cadia, a dark vortex erupted, drawing in the souls of everything nearby. Ships, planets, and even demons were consumed, funneled into one rising shape. And when the dust cleared, Nihilus stood, once more, whole. But now, he was more. He was no longer bound to a single galaxy or force. He had absorbed the echoes of the warp, the memories of chaos, the prayers of the Imperium, and the despair of mankind. He was hunger, universal, infinite, aware. The Imperium's response was immediate. The Grey Knights, Custodes, and Adeptus Mechanicus formed a coalition under the banner of Operation Nullfire. Massive null-field weapons were deployed, psychic dampeners designed to erase warp entities. But when they fired upon Nihilus, the beams simply vanished. He turned toward them, not with rage, but with apathy. His gaze fell upon the flagship Vigil Primus, crewed by over 30,000 souls. In an instant, they ceased to exist. Their matter remained, lifeless statues of ash, but their spirits were gone. From Terra to the farthest reaches of the Segmentum Pacificus, the Emperor felt it. Nihilus's return tore through his psychic awareness like a wound. The Golden Throne trembled. The Astronomican's light dimmed once again. The Emperor focused his will, projecting his consciousness into the warp. There, in the silent black, he saw Nihilus. Two beings of impossible magnitude faced each other, one the light of mankind, the other its devouring void. Their minds touched, and the warp screamed. In that instant, the Emperor understood what Nihilus was. Not a creature of the Force, not a demon, but a universal constant. Entropy, given thought, hunger, incarnate. He could not be destroyed, only contained. Back in real space, the High Lords of Terra convened. Panic swept through the chamber. The Ecclesiarch demanded faith. The Fabricator General demanded weapons. The Inquisition demanded silence. And the Emperor from his throne gave only one command: seal the warp. A silence followed, then terror. To seal the warp would mean cutting humanity off from the Emperor's light, ending the Astronomicon, ending the Imperium's travel, communication, and faith. But he knew the truth. If Nihilus continued to feed, there would soon be no warp left to close. Thus began the darkest decree in Imperial history, the preparation for the Great Seal, a ritual of impossible scale meant to cage both the warp and the hunger within it. And deep within the void, Darth Nihilus turned his gaze toward Terra. He did not smile. He did not speak. But every soul on that world felt the same whisper crawl across their mind. I will feed upon your god. The galaxy convulsed as the Emperor's decree spread. Seal the warp. No order in the history of the Imperium had ever carried such finality, such dread. To sever humanity from the immaterium was to choke it of breath, of light, of its soul. Yet across 1,000 systems, the Adeptus Mechanicus began to prepare. Titans were redirected to sacred forge worlds. The black ships were recalled. Even the navigator houses, ancient, proud and secretive, bowed in silence. The Emperor's will had spoken. There could be no debate. Upon Terra, in the depths beneath the Imperial Palace, the silent choir assembled. Thousands of psychers, bound in golden chains, were connected to the psychic lattice of the Golden Throne. Their minds would serve as conduits, amplifying the Emperor's will across the galaxy. Custodians stood at the perimeters, their expressions impassive, but their eyes filled with grim understanding. What was to come would alter existence itself. And while humanity prepared for salvation through sacrifice, Darth Nihilus continued his quiet conquest. He no longer devoured merely worlds. He consumed belief. Every soul he touched stripped away a layer of the galaxy's collective faith. Prayers grew weaker. The ecclesiarchy's sermons faltered. On shrine worlds, candles refused to stay lit. The very idea of the emperor's divinity was beginning to dissolve. Where once chaos had thrived on corruption and temptation, Nihilus brought a far crueler fate: emptiness. To be consumed by him was to become less than nothing, not even a memory in the warp's tides. On the demon world of Skull Harvest, the blood god's realm trembled. Khorne himself rose from his brass throne, his roar shaking dimensions. Rivers of blood evaporated into dust as Nihilus's shadow passed through his domain. Khorne swung his axe, a weapon that could split realities, and struck at the intruder. But his blow found no purchase. The axe disintegrated upon impact, the raw hatred within it drained of meaning. Khorne's scream of defiance echoed through all creation, then faded, hollow. His throne sat empty, his skulls turned to ash. Across the warp, chaos recoiled. Tzeentch's crystal towers cracked. Slaanesh's gardens withered. Even Nurgle's laughter died in his throat. The dark gods, for all their eternal might, faced something they could not manipulate, charm, or resist. Nihilus was devouring the concept of existence itself. Meanwhile, aboard Terra, the Emperor's mind stretched beyond the material plane. He reached across the warp, touching the fading threads of chaos, seeing the nothingness creeping in from all sides, and there, in the center of it all, was him, the masked spectre, drifting through annihilation. Nihilus turned toward that light, the only thing in the void he had not yet consumed. The Emperor's psychic projection appeared before him, wreathed in solar brilliance. For a moment, the void itself seemed to hesitate. Two forces, one that gave life meaning, the other that erased it, stood in silent opposition. "You are hunger," the Emperor's voice thundered, echoing across eternity. "But hunger has no purpose. It ends all, and then ends itself." Nihilus did not answer with words. He raised his hand, and the force surged, black, cold, ancient. The Emperor felt it. The same energy that once shaped the galaxy, far beyond this one, a power untamed by the warp's chaos. It pressed against his psychic shield, a tide of unmaking. For the first time in ages, the Emperor strained. His armor of faith cracked, and then Nihilus spoke. Not in words, but through thought, a voice that bypassed language and reason. "You feed too." The Emperor faltered, not physically, but in understanding. "You feed upon their faith, their souls. You devour their will to live and call it salvation." The accusation hit like a hammer, the truth, or perhaps the mirror of it. The Emperor, the god of mankind, sustained himself through the worship of trillions, the same way Nihilus did through death. Two sides of the same principle, one consuming to protect, the other consuming to end. For a fleeting instant, the Emperor glimpsed the awful symmetry. Then he steeled himself. "I feed to preserve. You feed to destroy." But Nihilus tilted his head, the faint echo of amusement in his empty gaze. The force pulsed once more, a wave of pure annihilation. Entire warp entities, minor gods, demons, psychic echoes, disintegrated as the wave expanded. Back on Terra, alarms blared. The Golden Throne shook violently, its mechanisms screaming in protest. The silent choir convulsed, their minds bursting under the pressure of channeling so much power. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests chanted binary prayers, desperate to stabilize the machine that held the Emperor's mortal shell. "Begin the seal," commanded the Fabricator General. Dozens of titanic generators, orbiting Terra in sacred alignment, activated simultaneously. The sky turned black. The stars vanished, replaced by a shimmering golden lattice. A psychic field of unimaginable scale began to form, a shell meant to encapsulate the entire Imperium, separating it from the warp. It was a desperate gambit. To save reality, the warp would have to die. But Nihilus was no longer bound to the warp. He had become the void itself, a bridge between existence and oblivion. As the seal formed, he drifted closer to Terra, drawn to the source of light he could never quite consume. Billions of Imperial citizens fell to their knees as the night sky above them warped into the shape of a mask. Massive beyond imagination, it hung over the atmosphere like a god's face, its hollow eyes gazing down. From the Aquila space docks, Admiral Tarsus stared at the phenomenon and whispered, "Emperor, protect us." But there was no answer. Nihilus extended his hand. The outer rings of Terra's orbital defense grid vaporized instantly, their energy absorbed and converted into silence. Space Marines across the Sol system prepared for battle, though they knew it was futile. Bolters, plasma, faith, none of it mattered against hunger itself. Within the palace, the Emperor gathered his will. The seal was nearly complete. If he could finish the ritual, Nihilus would be trapped beyond the veil, locked away forever in the nothingness he had birthed. But Nihilus had learned. From the Force, from the warp, from every soul he had consumed. He reached forward. And for the first time, the Emperor felt his power begin to unravel. Reality trembled as the two titans clashed. Thought against thought, faith against void. In orbit, the battlefleet solar broke apart, ships crumbling into dust without impact. The lunar defenses fell. Mars itself dimmed, its forges extinguished. The Mechanicum priests wept as their god's voice was swallowed by silence. In the final chamber of the throne, lightning of pure psychic light tore through the air. Custodians fell. The Sisters of Silence screamed without sound. The Emperor's voice echoed through every mind in the Imperium. "Hold fast. For every soul you lose, I shall burn a star in return." And for a moment, just a moment, the galaxy burned bright. Nihilus recoiled, his form flickering, his void scarred by the Emperor's light. The seal began to solidify. The warp screamed as the barrier started to close, but Nihilus was not gone. Not yet. He reached forward one last time, his voice echoing across every world, every ship, every soul. "If I am hunger, then you are the feast." And with that, the final confrontation began. The God Emperor of mankind against Darth Nihilus, the devourer of existence. The fate of all creation would be decided in silence. In the final moments before eternity, the galaxy stood still. Every soul, from the mightiest psyker to the humblest laborer, felt it. The air vibrated with something older than sound, a pressure that wasn't heard but understood. The Emperor and Darth Nihilus had met at the heart of reality, and everything that ever was trembled in anticipation. The golden throne blazed like a newborn star. Tendrils of psychic fire poured from it, illuminating Terra's night sky in hues unseen by mortal eyes. Nihilus's presence loomed over the planet like an eclipse, an infinite mask devouring the heavens. Every moment of his existence was hunger made manifest. Yet the Emperor's light did not fade. It intensified. For 10,000 years, he had endured torment, decay, worship, and silence. Now, at the end, he poured it all into this one act of defiance. Deep within the warp, or what remained of it, the Chaos Gods screamed. Their realms crumbled as Nihilus's void consumed the foundation of their power. Khorne's throne shattered. Tzeentch's ever-changing palace dissolved into meaningless vapor. Nurgle's garden shriveled into sterile dust. And Slanesh, once the master of sensation, withered in despair as her final emotion, fear, was devoured. But as the Chaos Gods died, the warp itself began to die with them. The source of psychic power, emotion, and faith, the sea upon which the Imperium sailed, was fading into nothingness, and Nihilus grew stronger with every heartbeat. Within the throne room, lightning of pure creation danced across the walls. Custodians burned to ash without a sound. The silent choir disintegrated, their sacrifice fueling the Great Seal's completion. The Adeptus Mechanicus priests chanted until their voices bled, their minds cracking under the strain of divinity made real. And through it all, the Emperor stood. Golden light radiated from his corpse-like frame, spilling across the stars, binding reality with the sheer force of will. His psychic projection, vast and blinding, faced Nihilus in the infinite void. Two entities beyond gods, two philosophies in collision. "You would end everything," the Emperor spoke, his words both wrath and sorrow. "But if there is no life, no soul, no memory, what will you feed upon?" Nihilus said nothing, his mask tilted slightly, the eternal gesture of one who could not comprehend mercy. Then came the thought, a whisper that filled every corner of existence. "When all is gone, I will be gone, and silence will reign for Nihilus." It was not cruelty, not vengeance. It was peace. The only peace he understood, the peace of extinction. The Emperor's gaze hardened. "Then I will not permit it." He drew upon every ounce of psychic energy ever offered to him, every prayer whispered in desperation, every plea for salvation, every fragment of belief across humanity's countless worlds. It flowed through him like a solar storm, turning his spectral form into something greater than flesh, greater than mind. He became light, pure, unyielding, eternal. And with that, he struck. The blast was not light nor sound, but truth. The Emperor's will crashed into Nihilus's void like two universes colliding. The warp folded, real space screamed, and time fractured. Stars exploded in silence, entire systems vanished between heartbeats. For a moment, Nihilus faltered. The mask cracked. Beneath it, there was no face, only an endless abyss, swirling and cold. Yet within that abyss, something flickered, faint, human. A memory of what he once was, the Jedi who had become too powerful, too wounded, too hungry to live. The Emperor saw it. "You were mortal once," he said softly, amid the storm. "You sought peace and found hunger. You feared loss and became the end of all things." Nihilus's response was a wave of darkness, a tidal force that consumed entire galaxies in a single breath. "There is no peace," the thought whispered, "only the void." But even as Nihilus fed, something began to change. The Emperor's light did not resist the void. It embraced it, for he had learned through millennia that the warp, for all its madness, was born from emotion, and that even hunger was a form of longing. "You crave the silence of death," the Emperor said, voice resonating through collapsing stars. "But you cannot destroy what gave you birth. You are not the end. You are part of life, the shadow that gives light its meaning." Nihilus hesitated. His power wavered. For the first time since his fall, he felt something alien, confusion. And in that hesitation, the Emperor acted. He extended his hand, not in wrath, but in grace. The golden light spread outward, wrapping around Nihilus's fragmented soul. "You will not be erased," he said. "You will be contained." From Terra to the furthest reaches of the Imperium, the Great Seal ignited. Vast pillars of psychic energy connected every major world, forming a luminous web that spanned the galaxy. The warp convulsed one final time, and then collapsed inward. The scream that followed was not of pain, but of completion. In that instant, Darth Nihilus ceased to be hunger. The void that had once devoured all was compressed, drawn inward by the Emperor's will, bound within the heart of the Golden Throne itself. The seal closed. Across the stars, silence fell. Not the empty silence of annihilation, but the quiet of survival. The warp no longer raged. The Astronomican's beam dimmed, but did not die. Humanity, blind and bruised, endured. When the light faded, the throne was still. The Emperor's body sat motionless, burned beyond recognition. The Adeptus Mechanicus declared his system stable, though his psychic presence was faint, a whisper instead of a roar. But the High Lords of Terra reported something strange. The Astronomican now pulsed with a rhythm, a slow, steady thrum, as if something within it was breathing. And deep within the throne's psychic core, where none could see, a shape floated in the golden void. A mask, cracked but whole, bound in chains of light. Nihilus was contained, his hunger redirected, his essence serving as the new guardian of the barrier between the warp and real space. He would feed no longer on life, but on corruption, on the whispers of chaos that sought to return. And so, the galaxy endured. The chaos gods were gone. The warp was sealed. Humanity, for the first time in 10 millennia, stood in true silence. Not out of fear, but out of peace. On the surface of Terra, dawn broke. The skies cleared. Billions wept without knowing why. In the stillness, a single thought drifted through the collective dream of mankind, a voice neither divine nor damned. Hunger is never gone, only sleeping. The Emperor's golden light flickered once more, brighter than before, and then steadied. The galaxy moved forward, unaware that within the throne of its god slept the ghost of another. Darth Nihilus, the last shadow, the devourer, turned sentinel. And though his hunger was bound, somewhere beyond time and stars, in the deep silence between heartbeats, the void whispered still. The end was not destruction, it was balance.